My two college friends doing a weekend camping trip in the woods near us. I'll use different names for their privacy, so I'll call them Ryan and Jamie. Ryan and I aren't experienced in outdoor activities, so it was Jamie leading us through it all. He had a small spot by the river that he led us to. It was a couple miles through the woods, but there was a huge field just on the edge of the river that we would set up camp at. When we got there, nobody else was there. We set everything up right in the middle of the field, between the woods and the river, then brought out the beers and sat around a campfire. A little while after getting there, I happened to see some people out by the tree line. They looked like hunters, having dirty clothes and backpacks, like they were blending into the woods, but I didn't see any rifles. They were pretty far though, so maybe I just couldn't see them. I pointed them out to my friends, but Jamie had a puzzled look. He said hunting in these woods was illegal, and it wasn't even hunting season anyway. He seemed really concerned that they were out here. Ryan joked that he was taking it too seriously, and we went back to our random conversations. A few more hours later, we agreed to call it a night. The sun had been down for a while at this point, and the hike had really worn us out. We all went into our tents, but not being used to it, I found it really hard to fall asleep. Something about being out in the open, in a tiny tent, and laying on a thin blow-up mattress just had me feeling off. I must have laid there for a whole 2 hours, and at that point, I was just hoping I could at least get a few hours of sleep. But then something instantly made me wide awake. Footsteps coming toward our tents. At first I thought it had to be Ryan or Jamie, probably coming back from using the bathroom, but I swear I would have heard them unzipping their tent and walking out. Only a few seconds later though, I realized there were more than just one set of footsteps. There were 2 or 3, maybe even more, all walking in a line. I looked at the thin wall of my tent, thinking I should be able to see their lights coming toward us, but there weren't any lights at all. Surely whoever was out there had to have seen our tents set up in the middle of an open field, and nobody in their right mind would just walk past us like this. I didn't know what to do though. I just pretended to be asleep, quietly listening to them getting closer. The line of people came probably just a few feet from us, walking right past our tents. As soon as they were far enough away, I quietly unzipped my tent and looked out. Just when I did, Ryan unzipped his tent too. We both looked at each other with alarmed faces, then looked out at the group. They were barely visible, but definitely still walking away. I slipped out of my tent and opened Jamie's, waking him up. Both of us explained what happened, and surprisingly, he seemed even more horrified than either of us, likely because he'd been camping plenty of times and knew how odd this was. We started packing up our stuff, feeling way too uneasy to stay the rest of the night. While packing, Jamie suddenly told us with a shaky voice to hurry. We looked up at him, then followed his gaze. In the tree line, the group of what now looks like 5 or 6 people were standing and looking over at us. My adrenaline was pumping now, and I shoved everything into my bag, and we all sprinted for the trail. We left our lights off to hopefully not be seen, so the rest of the walk we were barely able to see anything. Luckily we made it back, but what that group is doing out there is unknown. Based on everything though, I don't think our encounter with them was any sort of accident. This was a long time ago, when I was 13. It was summer. I spent pretty much all day playing on my PS3 or watching whatever was on TV. Sometimes I'd go outside or hang with some friends, but it was raining this day, so I was hunkered down inside. My dad always worked until 10, and my mom was a nurse, so her schedule was all over the place. Most of this day, I was playing on the PS3, but around 7-ish, I went to the kitchen to make food. While I was in there, a knock came at the front door. I didn't really want to answer, and as a kid, I was always nervous when someone was at the door, so I waited a minute and tried to just be quiet until they left. After they knocked several more times though, I snuck over to the door and looked out the peephole to see if maybe it was a neighbor or someone else I knew. I was really confused though, and kind of alarmed to see a police officer. He was standing on our porch, looking around and waiting for me to answer, and now I felt like I had to. I opened the door. It was still cold and rainy outside, and the officer was drenched. Being a kid, my eyes were immediately drawn toward the gun on his hip, and overall, I just felt scared or like I was in trouble. He asked my name, then reassured me that everything was okay and I didn't have anything to worry about. He then smiled, as if trying to keep me calm, but his teeth were noticeably rotting and yellow, which then got me to notice how overall unkempt he looked. Like, usually cops were well put together, so this was really off-putting. He definitely noticed my hesitation though, because he tried to speed up the conversation, saying he needed to search the home. I was terrified and confused, but I knew something was wrong, and that's when I noticed that there was no police car by my house. Especially with it raining, all these red flags piled up, and just as he was starting to step forward, I slammed the door and locked it. He didn't even try to say anything else. He immediately slammed something against the door, hard enough to shake the entire door and push me back a little. Thinking the door would give out, I ran to the home phone and dialed 911. I was freaking out so much, I'm surprised the operator even understood a word I said. The guy outside didn't give up the whole time though, and was even there still, banging on the door when the actual police showed up. I heard him trying to convince them he was a real cop, but obviously that didn't go well. He was taken in, and initially my parents didn't tell me much about the charges, probably for my own safety. But a few years later, they told me that during the interrogation, the man admitted to attempting to kidnap me. Had I been any more trusting, I don't know where I'd be right now. I work at a gas station. I'd been there for several years, and this night was one that I assumed would be like all the rest. I came in at 8 and took over for the day worker, who went home right away. The first couple hours went by quickly, as there were still customers coming in regularly to buy a few things or to pay for gas with cash. Between 11 and 12, it slowed down, to where it began feeling like the shift was dragging on. I kept myself busy for another hour, or at least tried to, with stocking whatever I could find, but then I was left with the dreaded second half of my shift. It was always slow, boring, and just not enjoyable. Around 1 though, a car pulled in and parked in the spaces by the entrance door. A few other cars had come through recently, but just to get gas real quick. Very rarely would someone actually park in the spots and come into the store this late into the night. I stood up straight and tried to rub the tired look off my face, expecting them to come in. A couple minutes went by though, and they didn't. I leaned over the counter and looked out the glass door, but couldn't really see anything. The reflections on the door were blocking any way for me to see inside their car. Maybe they were just taking a break from a long drive. I didn't bother caring too much about it. I sat back and pulled up my phone. I spaced out, reading through random articles and whatnot for probably 20 or so minutes. During that time, I never heard anything or saw anything, but eventually I looked up from my phone and my heart almost stopped. There was a guy inside the store, standing in one of the aisles and looking right at me. His eyes darted away as soon as I saw him. This guy looked like he was mid-40, with a dark jacket on and a scruffy beard. I never saw or heard him enter, so how the hell did he get in? While my mind was racing, I just watched as the man kept walking around, glancing over at me a few times to see if I was looking, like he was planning to do something as soon as I looked away. Then, after just 30 seconds, he suddenly hurried toward the front door and ran outside. I got up and ran to look out. This was when I noticed the car was still there, but the guy walked right past it and just out to the road until I could no longer see him. I immediately went to the cameras to see how he got in and figure out what was going on. It only took me a minute to find the footage of him slowly and quietly getting out of the car, then going to the back of the gas station. There were no cameras back there, but those doors were never locked since the gas station was technically always open anyway. What's really odd is that there were 15 minutes between the time he went around to the back to the time he walked out onto the sales floor. Police came to help me investigate, ultimately finding the car he left to have been a stolen vehicle from months ago. They didn't know anything about the guy or his motives. Sneaking around though, he clearly had something else intended for that night, and I think I was really lucky that for one reason or another, he decided not to go through with it. I was off of work this night and relaxing at home. My roommate was out of town for a couple of days visiting his parents, and I was somewhat of a night owl, so I enjoyed staying up late. It was around 12, and I was sipping on a beer while watching TV when a faint sound came from above me. At first, I didn't even process it, like my body just ignored it. But after a few seconds, it kind of hit me as I realized it couldn't have been my roommate, like it usually would have been. I looked up at the ceiling and muted the TV to try and listen for it again. A few seconds went by, and there was nothing. The sound was so soft though, and with the TV being on when I heard it, I really had no idea what it could have been, or even where upstairs it came from. Although this sounds pretty dumb of me, I really didn't feel like getting up, and wasn't worried enough about it to feel the need to check it out. I opened the mini fridge I had next to the couch and grabbed another beer, cracking it open and taking a few sips to get back to relaxing. But before I could even unmute the TV, I heard that same thump sound above me. I looked back up at the ceiling, and after a moment, I could hear subtle footsteps slowly walking in the room right above me. My whole body felt like it went numb. I got up from the couch and went over to the stairs. I stood at the bottom and could hear a thumping sound resonating through the hallway. I called out my roommate's name. I knew it couldn't be him, but I was just hoping that somehow it was. After there was no reply, I started scaling the stairs and flicked on the lights to the upstairs hallway. It was empty, but the door on the far end was open. It was to my roommate's room, but I was 100% certain that I'd closed it the day he left, and I never went in there since, so there should be no reason it was open right now. My heart was pounding as I walked through the hallway and looked inside the room. It looked the same as it did when he left. Everything was clean and nothing was out of place. I then went around and checked every room upstairs and still found nothing. I didn't sleep that night and spent the next couple days on edge as I waited for my roommate to get home. I never heard those sounds after that night or had any doors randomly open like that. At this point, I don't know what the hell happened. Maybe someone found a way in and out without me knowing, or maybe it was something else. To this day, I still don't know. My name is Leo, and I work for a pizza shop in my small town. I don't do deliveries or anything, but I do mostly everything there is to do inside the shop. I make pizzas, organize the stations, clean, and get all the closing tasks done every night before I leave. My interactions with customers is usually pretty minimal, since we have a few high school kids to take orders and everything, but they're only scheduled until 11 on weekdays. The shop closes at 12:30, so any orders or customers that come in after that, I have to take care of. This was a regular Monday shift. Everything went smoothly for the most part, and at 11 my coworker left, so it was just me to close up. It's usually really slow, so I started the cleanup process. About a half hour before closing, a call came in. Praying it wasn't for a last-minute order, I picked up the phone. I said my generic "thanks for calling, how can I help you" line, and right after I finished, there was a quiet pause. Then they hung up. I put the phone down and said a few choice words, thinking it was a prank call from a couple immature kids. I went back to the kitchen where I was cleaning, but not even 30 seconds later, I heard the bell ring by the door. The timing was annoying, but I put everything back down and walked back to the front. A guy was now standing at the counter. He had a heavy coat on and a black beanie over his shaggy hair. His eyes were what really put me off, though. He had dark circles and bags, like he hadn't slept in days, yet his eyes were wide open. How can I help you?" I said, standing a couple feet from the counter. "I'd like to place an order right now." The way he said it was odd, and it very obviously told me that something was wrong with him. I said okay and asked what he wanted, but it almost seemed like he wasn't expecting me to say that. His eyes just continued to hold this disturbing stare at me as he struggled to respond. I looked away out of uncomfort, but my eyes fell on his hand that was partially out of his jacket pocket. He was holding a knife, like a typical kitchen knife. I think he was trying to hide it, but I could see the handle in his hand, and part of the blade was sticking out of his pocket. I felt my stomach drop and blood rush from my face, almost like I was gonna faint. I looked back up, and his eyes were still staring at me, but his face was stiff and emotionless. The sound of the door opening made both of us jump, and both of us looked over. It was some other random customer walking into the shop, and they immediately seemed to realize something was wrong. They stopped in place, stumbling over a few words, before the guy by the register suddenly walked past him and out the door. I used the phone to call 911 and tried to explain to the other customer what had happened. We also watched out the window as the guy got into his car and sped out of the parking lot. That was the last we saw of him, though. What I think happened was he parked outside the shop and watched in the window as he called us. Once he saw that it was me answering the phone, I guess he knew I was alone, so that's when he walked in. If not for the random customer walking inside in that moment, I don't know what would have happened. He was clearly insane and armed with a kitchen knife, so it couldn't have been good. Since then, I still haven't seen him come back, and I really hope I never do. I was 17 and living in my parents' basement. It wasn't a trashy basement or anything. It was probably similar to what would be considered an in-law suite. My parents traveled for work all the time, so I usually wouldn't be in the basement unless I was sleeping in the bedroom down there, or playing video games, or whatever. This was during one of my parents' work trips. I was alone for a whole week. This night was a Saturday, so I didn't have school, or really anything to do. I knew it was supposed to storm later in the day though, so before it was too late, I took my parents' car out to the store and got some food to make. While driving back, the storm rolled in. The roads weren't busy, thankfully, because even with the windshield wipers going at the fastest setting, it was still difficult to see. I pulled into the driveway and ran to the front door, getting inside and drying off. I then went straight to the kitchen and turned on the oven so I could make dinner. But almost right away, I heard something below me. It sounded like something falling over in the basement, like maybe a box or something. My first thought was that there might be a leak down there, and I got really worried about a possible flood. So I quickly went to the basement. I opened the door and flicked on the light, and as I walked down the steps, I didn't hear anything. No running water or any other sounds, and when I got to the bottom, everything looked okay. I walked through the main area, where I had a small couch and TV set up, and then I went to the storage room. This was the only unfinished part of the basement, where we just stored a bunch of boxes and stuff. I opened the door and looked in. At first, it all looked normal, and I was actually really confused at what I could have heard. All the boxes were stacked up still, and nothing was on the ground. But after a quick walkthrough, I noticed something really strange. One of the boxes sitting on top of the stack was open, and when I looked inside, everything was scattered all over the place. It was full of old trophies that my parents kept, and almost all of them were broken. It looked like the box had fallen and broken everything inside, and then someone quickly tossed everything back in. I felt a surge run through my body as I just stared at that box and realized what this meant. I looked up and started scanning the room. It felt like suddenly, all I could think about was how loud the storm was outside, making me unable to listen for anything, which only got me more panicked. I started to back up, and just as I did, one of the boxes in the back of the room was knocked onto the ground, and behind it, a guy came running right at me. I booked it for the stairs, and I have to say, there is nothing more terrifying than hearing his footsteps climbing the stairs just a few feet behind me. The fear really got to me, and on the last step, I slammed my foot on the stairs and fell straight on the ground. Every horrible scenario just rushed through my head in that moment, but when I turned around, the guy came up to the top of the staircase and immediately ran for the front door, running out of the house. I got up and locked it behind him, then called the cops. They found an unlocked window that he climbed in through, but as far as why he came into the home, there really isn't any answer. I was getting out of work late due to a recent security issue at our company that had everyone working overtime. I would usually take the train to and from work, but since I knew I'd be out past the train's running hours, I had to drive. It was nearly an hour to get home. As I was getting out of the city though, I saw that my gas was almost empty. I didn't remember it being this low before work, but I could have been too tired to have even noticed it. I knew there was a gas station by my house though, so I was just gonna fill it up there. But 10 minutes later, an alert came up on my dashboard that I was extremely low on fuel. It had gone down way more than it should have in such a short time, and within a minute, my car was stuttering and barely running. I pulled over, and just as I put it in park, the engine cut out. I tried to start it again, but it didn't budge. I was both worried and frustrated, like how the hell was this even happening? I took out my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out. The issue took less than 5 seconds to find. There was gas clearly leaking. I had no idea how this could even have happened, since everything was fine earlier. But before I could do much thinking, a truck pulled up behind me. Their headlights were off, and they parked unnervingly quickly, like there was no hesitation. I stood up and looked at their windshield, seeing a couple figures moving around in there. "I'm okay, guys. Don't need any help," I called out, but they didn't pay any attention. They kept moving around until one of the doors opened. A guy got out, while the other, or others, stayed in the truck. Ironically, he asked if I needed help as he started walking toward me. The way he said it was weird though, with a smirk and a strange tone to his voice. Again, I said I didn't need anything. He kept walking though, until he was right in front of me, standing uncomfortably close. "Why don't I give you a ride home? It's the least I could do," he said, giving a creepy, forced smile. I declined his offer and quickly got into my car. Disturbingly, he stood there for a while, like an entire minute, just looking at me through the window and not saying anything. I just looked forward and called the police for help with my car. But the whole time, I could see him in the corner of my eye, standing right outside my window and just staring at me. During the phone call though, he walked back to his truck. I watched in the mirror as he got in, then slowly drove past me. We made eye contact as he passed by, and for a brief moment, I saw someone in his back seat. They were pressed up against the window, with wide open eyes, and although I couldn't get a good look at them, I knew something was wrong. I don't think that person was inside that truck willingly. When he drove off though, the license plate was missing. Police showed up and I told them everything. There was a bit of an investigation where they found my gas tank was stabbed purposefully by someone. Likely what happened was the guy planned the whole thing out, following me until my car broke down and hoping to get me to accept the ride. Whether that person was truly in danger, we don't know, because the man was never found. I was in Washington State, spending several days backpacking through the national parks. I was already about 20 miles out from the nearest road, and for the first 2 days, I hadn't run into a single person. It was the beginning of fall, so the weather was a bit colder than most people would be okay with, but I had all the necessary equipment. Anyway, in the morning, I got up and made a quick coffee over my pocket stove, then headed out to the next campsite. It was 6 miles out, which in the mountains is a pretty far hike. 4 hours into this walk, though, I suddenly heard footsteps ahead of me. I looked up and saw a man walking along the trail, going the opposite way as me. I wasn't really expecting to see anyone, but I smiled and nodded as he passed by. But I noticed something really strange. He had no backpack, no water bottle, literally nothing. He was just wearing a long-sleeve t-shirt and some old hiking pants. I even turned around to get another look at him because I was so confused. When I did, though, he happened to also glance back at me, so to keep things from being weird, I just turned back around and continued walking. After getting some distance, I kind of forgot about it. I think I came up with some idea that he had a campsite nearby and was just going for a walk, but I also knew that no established camps were anywhere near there. Whatever the case, I didn't find it worth thinking on too much. The next several hours were difficult, but eventually I made it to my campsite. It was empty, with just one small spot for my tent to go on. It wasn't as great as I was hoping, though. The view was supposed to be a lot better, but from the actual campsite, there wasn't really any view at all. It was kind of covered up by all the trees. The whole campsite really just felt like it was in the middle of a forest, rather than on a mountain top. I was rightfully exhausted, though, and went straight away to setting up my tent, and then relaxing while watching the sunset. As I sat there, I randomly heard a shuffling sound behind me. I turned and was completely stunned to see that same man I'd run into earlier. He still had no backpack or anything, but even more confusing was why he was at this campsite. He was walking in the complete opposite direction when I last saw him, and for him to get here now, he must have turned around pretty soon after running into me. As he walked up to the campsite, he didn't look at me, like he was purposefully pretending that I wasn't there, or that he couldn't see me. He went up to the other side of this small area we were in, and he sat down. No tent, no sleeping bag, no anything. Just sitting on the dirt and looking out into the forest. He was only 15 or so feet from me, but with him looking away, I was able to get a much better look at him. The man looked like he was in his late 30s and had a short scruffy beard with short brown hair. I couldn't help but feel really uneasy. Nothing about this was natural, and as the sun continued to set, it only made me feel even more unsafe. Who was this guy, and what the hell was he doing 25 miles out in the forest with no shelter or food or water? About 30 minutes passed, and he still didn't move. I decided, though, that I couldn't stay there. I had nowhere else to really go, but I figured I just had to find some random spot and make sure he didn't follow me. I began taking down my tent and packing up, and it was only then that the man looked over at me. And once he did, he never looked away. Every time I looked at him, he was staring right at me. Once I got everything stashed in my backpack, I saw in the corner of my eye that the man stood up. I began walking as fast as I could, hearing his footsteps following close behind me. I clutched my small knife tightly in my hands, unsure what was going to happen. After a minute, I looked back a few times, seeing him still following, but getting further away. Then I took a risk. I veered off the trail and into the woods. It was pitch black by now, so I hoped he didn't see me and would just keep walking. once I was maybe 20 feet into the woods, I leaned out behind a tree and waited. 30 seconds later, his footsteps came down the trail, but just as he was about to pass by, he stopped. I watched his figure in the dark, looking around as if he knew I wasn't on the trail anymore. Then he started yelling. He was trying to sound friendly, too, which made it even more disturbing. After 2 minutes, though, he stopped yelling, but instead of going back to the campsite, he walked straight into the woods on the other side of the trail. His figure disappeared, and the woods fell silent. I must have waited there for over an hour before finally getting up and making my way back. I forced my body to push through and skip the next campsite just to be safe. When I was back in town, I put in a report with the local police office. They never followed up with me, though. I don't know if that man was living out there, or was trying to rob or kidnap people, or maybe even both, but I'm lucky to have gotten away when I did. I was working my regular 2 to 10 closing shift at a small drive-through cafe. It's a really small place, with just 5 or so indoor seating tables, since most of our business is focused on the drive-through. This wasn't a busy spot though, especially during the later hours of the day. Being the only one working the closing shift, I'd usually sit at one of the dining tables and be on my phone, only getting up if someone came to the drive-through. It was drizzling outside this night, so it was even less busy than it already would have been. Past 7 o'clock, not a single customer came through for 2 hours straight. I was just sitting at a table watching Netflix on my phone when suddenly the front door opened. It kind of startled me, as nobody ever comes inside the shop this late. He seemed to not notice me sitting at the table though, because he walked up to a different table on the other end of the store and sat down with his back facing me. Something was definitely off about this guy though. He was very tall and wearing really dark clothing, and although it was only drizzling outside, he was soaked. Water was dripping from all over his clothes and onto the floor, and that got me thinking about how he even got here. No cars had pulled in, so he must have walked. Anyway, I stood up and walked over to the table, greeting him and asking what he wanted. He didn't smile or say hi back to me. He just sat there with a blank look on his face. I waited a few seconds before repeating myself, but he cut me off. He asked who else was working tonight. I was confused, but also slightly nervous about that question, but I still answered for some reason. "It's just me, but we close in an hour." He then asked for a small coffee, so I walked back to the kitchen and started making it. I grabbed a cup and poured it in, then turned to go back to the table when I saw him standing in the doorway to the kitchen. "Do you need something else?" He didn't respond. Now facing directly at me, I could see that his eyes were bloodshot, but his face was still blank, like no emotion whatsoever. It made me really uneasy. "Put the drink down and come with me." He was demanding it, and he looked ready to force me if I didn't. This guy was way bigger than me, so I really had no choice. I moved slow, trying to think of any way out of this as I followed him. As we left the store though, he grabbed the back collar of my shirt and pushed me across the parking lot toward the road. On the other side of this empty road was a completely wooded area with no buildings or houses as far as I knew, and that's exactly where he was leading me. Just as we were about to cross the road, though, a single car came out and rolled past us. As it did, the man stopped, which forced me to stop, and both of us stared at the car and realized what it was. A police officer looking right back at us. I started screaming, and the guy immediately let go and sprinted across the road and into the woods. The officer pulled right into the parking lot and made sure I was okay, then called for backup. What's crazy is he wasn't even on his shift. He was actually heading home for the night and just happened to see us at the perfect time to save me. If he had even been 30 seconds earlier or later, I would have been dragged into those woods, unseen, and probably never made it out. Anyway, the cameras picked up some decent footage of him, but as of yet, still nothing has been found. I'll update if anything else happens, but I just hope he doesn't come back. This was just over 2 years ago. My name is Jake, and before this I had no camping experience whatsoever. I really wanted to get into it though, and the only way to get into it is to go out and do it. So this was my first camping trip. I chose a campground 2 hours away from my city. It was one that seemed like it wouldn't be too crowded, but also I wouldn't be completely alone, which I thought would be ideal for my first time. I drove up there and arrived at the trailhead around noon, then hiked for another few hours before getting to the campground. There were a few park-style benches and a couple ground-mounted barbecue grills around the site. A few short trails split off and went to smaller campsites, where some other people had tents set up. I went down one of these trails and put my things down, then spent the next hour getting my tent set up correctly and making sure everything was working properly. By then, a few people were in the middle area, using the grills and chatting. I'm not a super social guy, so I didn't feel comfortable inserting myself into the group, but a half hour later, a guy walked down to where I was set up and invited me to hang with them. It was a nice gesture, and he seemed cool enough, so I went with it. I followed him up and met a few of the others that were camping here. Everyone was cool, so I hung around for another hour, but after that some people split ways. I said goodnight to everyone and headed back to my tent as well. It was probably around 7, so just an hour left of sunlight, when TJ, the guy from earlier, came walking back to my tent. For reference, he was around my age, like mid to late 20s. When he came over, he asked if I'd ever been to this area before. I said no, and then he asked if I knew about the lake that was nearby. I said no again, and he immediately started telling me about this amazing hidden lake that nobody knew about and how it was a super cool spot and that he was going to head there if I wanted to tag along. Again, it seemed like a friendly gesture, and honestly, I was super intrigued. I tossed my stuff back into my tent and left everything there, then followed him. He said it was a 10-ish minute walk through the woods, so we definitely had enough time before sunset. From the campsite, we followed this really thin footpath through the trees. It wasn't a defined trail at all, but it looked like it had at least been used a few times before. 10 minutes passed though, and there was no lake in sight. TJ also got weirdly quiet. Before he was very talkative and charismatic, and now he was suddenly giving one-word responses. He also kept looking out at the sunset, and while he could have just been trying to make sure we had time, something in me felt like he was doing the opposite. Like he was waiting for the sun to go down. After 20 minutes of walking, I started putting some distance between us. I wasn't so sure anymore about what this was, but I could feel my adrenaline kicking in, so I guess my body knew. The sun was just barely lighting up thin rows of light through the trees, and it felt like the forest was so quiet all of a sudden. When I thought I had a chance, I turned and tried to quietly run back the way we came, but he immediately noticed. He called out once in a nicer tone, as if still in character as my friend, but then he quickly turned to frustrated yelling as I could hear him sprinting behind me. There was probably an entire minute of him yelling and chasing me through the woods before I could hear his steps slowing down. Then I heard a loud metallic thump right behind me. I looked back for a split second, seeing what looked like a knife ricocheting off a tree a few feet from me. I guess it was his last-ditch effort to stop me. After that, I lost him. I got back to the others and tried to tell them what happened, and one of them called the police for me. TJ, or whoever he was, never came back. In fact, everyone said he was already at the campsite when they got there, and after a bit of looking, he didn't even have a tent anywhere. He probably targeted me though, because I was alone, and he knew I hadn't had much hiking or camping experience. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out what he had intended for that night though, because if I had, I probably wouldn't be here. This was almost 2 years ago now. I was doing what I thought was going to be a regular vacation to where my parents live. I had rented an Airbnb for the first time, so I was really excited. The house was on a large plot of land and was very spacious and quiet. I lived in the city, so this was like luxury to me. I set everything in the room and pretty much left right away to see my family. I spent the whole afternoon with them before heading back to the Airbnb and making a quick snack, then hopping on the couch to watch a movie for the night. It was like 10 or 11, so pretty late, but in the middle of the movie, I heard someone walking outside the house. There was no mistaking that sound, and it just completely threw me off guard. I paused the movie and got up, quickly walking to the back of the house and looking out the back door. It was obviously dark out, but a guy was walking away from the house and toward the trees that were behind it. What's really creepy is that I never heard his footsteps approaching. Like he must have already been standing by the house for a while before I heard him leave. Once he was out of sight, I opened the back door and stepped outside. The back patio was empty, but along the house, there were clear shoe prints in the grass. I followed them, leading up to one of the windows, and when I looked through it, there was a direct line of sight to the couch I was sitting on. I got chills just thinking about that man staring into the house at me without me knowing. I quickly went back inside and covered up all the windows. For the next half hour, I sat in the living room and continued the movie with the volume on low. That way I could focus on listening if he came back. I didn't hear anything, though. Once the movie was finished, I knew I had to get to bed, so I went back up to the window to do one last look to make sure everything was okay. I moved the curtains and saw nothing, but heard footsteps sprinting away from right outside the window. I hesitated before looking out and seeing that same guy running into the tree line. I immediately got my phone and called the police. Of course, by then, he was too far for them to find him, or even really search. However, while we were looking around the house, I noticed that my suitcase in the bedroom was open. It had clearly been searched through, and a few things were even missing. This probably happened while I was with my family, and the guy could have even been still in the house when I came back, only to sneak out of a window before I saw him. Why he came back afterward is what really disturbs me though. If I hadn't caught him watching me, there's a chance I would have gone right to bed, with him waiting right outside the window. It was the fall of 2018 when this happened to me. I was 22, and at the time I was living temporarily on the East Coast, right outside of the Appalachian mountain range. I'll go ahead and admit that I've never been too much of an outdoorsy person, and hadn't had any experience in camping or anything, nor was I really that interested in those sorts of activities. However, this was my last year living in probably the best place to do all those outdoor things. Plus, with it being mid-fall and the trees looking pretty and the weather being nice, I figured this was my chance to try it out. I didn't want to go for a huge camping adventure or anything, so I found a simple hiking trail instead that had some good views of the mountains. I prepped a small backpack with water, snacks, and a first aid kit. No cars were there, though it was just a small dirt parking area, so I guess it wasn't as popular as I thought. I parked and started walking. It was calm, and it definitely didn't feel like a path a lot of people would take. It didn't have any noticeable recent shoe prints in the dirt. It was just a fairly small path, with trees on either side. As I got further in, the entire path became more densely covered in trees, enough to block out a lot of the sun and make the whole trail shaded. It was actually really nice and cooling, but not hearing or seeing anyone else became more of an unsettling thought the further out I got. Not in a creepy way, but just that I was entirely alone. It wasn't something I was used to. About an hour, or maybe even 2 hours down the trail, I was caught off guard by seeing a man ahead of me. He was sitting on the side, looking like he was just taking a break under one of the trees. As I passed him, I gave a friendly nod and said hi, to which he looked up at me and said nothing. He didn't smile or nod. He just looked at me for a few seconds, and then I looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe he didn't hear me, or maybe I caught him off guard as well, but the strange look, without even a slight smile, was not giving me a good feeling. I walked a bit faster for the next part of the trail, hoping to put some distance between us. After an hour, I slowed down and made it to the end, which was an overlook of the mountains. The fall colors on the trees made the view way better than it probably would have been any other time of the year, and overall, I was glad to have made the hike. I stared off into the distance for a few minutes, enjoying a view that I almost never got to see, but when I turned around to leave, my heart almost left my body when I saw the man from earlier standing right at the end of the trail. He was maybe 10 feet from me, and I never heard him walking up. After the initial scare, I realized how creepy it was that he was just standing there and not coming up to look out the overlook like a normal person would be doing. But then he did something even more odd. His face shifted as he smiled and said hi, asking me how the view was. "Yeah, it's really nice. You should take a look too," I responded, trying to be polite but still really confused. The man stepped closer, then pointed to my right and said there was an even better view down that trail. I looked over my shoulder to where he was pointing. There was a path, barely visible, going through the dense trees. It was rugged and undefined, not something that looked to be used very often. The man walked up to where the path started and stood at the entrance, telling me again about how great the view was and saying it was just a minute or two to walk there. I politely declined, but he continued to tell me about how great it was, to the point where it was obvious that he had to have other intentions than just wanting me to go there and see a nice view. I said I was okay and had to get home, then started to walk toward the main trail, but the man was quick to move his body in front of it. I stopped in place, now even more terrified and thinking of the possible intentions of this man, who was just a few feet from me in the middle of an empty forest. The man looked at me with a blank expression. I took a few steps, walking around him and just hoping that nothing escalated, and for some miraculous reason, it didn't. The man watched me as I made my way around him and down the trail. Every time I looked back, he was still watching me, not even trying to be discreet. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I made it back to my car. I don't know what that man was trying to do, but it was almost surely not anything good. What was down that path likely was just a dead end, somewhere for him to lead me before doing whatever horrible thing he had in mind. I don't know why he didn't stop me from leaving either. Maybe he was worried about doing something on the main trail. All I can say is that I'm lucky to have gotten out before something else happened. I was 16 last year, and me and my friend Leon were hanging out a few days before Halloween, talking about what we wanted to do. We felt too old to go trick-or-treating, but we also still wanted to do something and have some fun during the holiday. We thought up a few ideas, most being quickly discarded, but then I thought of something different. I reminded Leon of the abandoned farm that both of us had already known about and suggested we explore it. It would be creepy and thrilling, which was exactly what we wanted for Halloween. Also, compared to our other ideas, this one was the best by a long shot. Leon was excited about it too, but we both agreed that other people would probably have the same idea to go on October 31st. So instead, we chose to go on the night before. We didn't want to risk running into anyone crazy at an abandoned place like that. We just wanted to explore and maybe be a little bit spooked, then leave, which sounded harmless enough. On the 30th, Leon drove us out to the neighborhood it was by and parked on the road. Then we got out and walked through the neighborhood until we got to the street that turned into a gravel path. This was the driveway leading up to the farm. I'd only ever seen the place during the day, but it was pretty much just a large field of grass with a typical wooden barn and a single-story home. From the edge of the path, neither structure was visible. Our flashlights only lit up a few feet ahead as we started making our way down the gravel driveway. Once we started to get closer, we could see the outline of the barn on the left side and the house further back at the end of the driveway. We were more interested in the house, figuring the barn was probably completely empty and not very exciting. We kept walking and got to a clearing of the tall grass. It was like a circle of dirt and short grass that went around the perimeter of the house. As we approached the front, we passed by some large farming equipment. I don't know what they were, just some sort of old tractor-looking things that had been left out for years. Even with our dim flashlights, we could see that they were engulfed in rust. When we got up to the porch, it looked like the door had been replaced by a solid wooden board. We walked around the whole outside of the house, and every window and door was sealed and covered. Disappointed, we went back to the front of the house and tried to think of something else. As we stood there, we saw the path going up to the barn. It wasn't an actual path, it was more of just a line of flattened grass. With nothing else to do, we started heading for the barn. Something felt different as we approached it, compared to when we approached the house. It was just an uneasy feeling that grew as we got closer. When we reached it, the large door was already wide open. I walked in first, and Leon followed behind, both shining our flashlights around as we entered. It only took a couple seconds for a horrid smell to hit us, though it was a barn, so it wasn't exactly surprising. But then we noticed something else. There were footprints all over the ground, but not what you'd expect from other kids exploring the place. They all went in a line, back and forth from a single point on the other side of the barn. I saw in Leon's eyes that he was just as freaked out as I was, but that was the goal of going there in the first place. We slowly walked in line with the footprints, leading to a wooden cellar hatch that was blended in with the floor. The only noticeable thing, other than the clear footsteps going up to it, was a shiny new padlock that held the hatch shut. Before we could really think about it, a sudden thud shook the whole barn. We turned around, seeing the door had been shut behind us. Leon sprinted over and shoved the door back open, and both of us looked around but didn't see anyone. Now terrified, we sprinted straight through the tall grass back to the gravel driveway, then booked it to the neighborhood where the car was. We definitely got the scare we were looking for, but maybe even too much so. Neither of us ever tried to figure out what really happened that night, but a couple months later, we saw that the whole house and barn had been blocked off. We tried to look up why, but there was no word publicly about it. What was going on there remains a mystery, but I think if we had stayed to find out, we may have never left. This happened last fall. It was toward the end of the season, closer to winter, and where I live it gets pretty cold, and even snows sometimes in October. I've been doing food delivery for the past 3 years and was working on this night. It was around 10 p.m. and lightly snowing outside. It was one of the first snowfalls, so people must have been skittish to go out. I was one of few cars driving around, but a lot of orders were coming in. Pretty much as soon as I'd finish one, another one would pop up. After driving around everywhere until almost 1 a.m., I took up one last order. The snow was starting to pick up, and I was just getting a little tired. I drove through the McDonald's that they'd ordered from and picked up the food, then set in the directions to the house. It was close, about 10 minutes away, but I didn't consider the direction it was in before accepting the order. It was opposite from where I lived, and I was already a good 25 minutes from home, so it was going to be a long drive home afterward. Annoyed at myself, I turned out of the parking lot and onto the road. The plow trucks still weren't out yet, probably because they weren't expecting this much downfall, but my SUV was usually good in the snow, so I wasn't that nervous. While I was driving, I noticed the road I was heading down was about to leave the main area of town. I checked the map again, and it said it was this way, but it was just a very unusual route. I didn't even know any houses were down there, because the only reason people take the road is to get to the highway that leads out of state. I went down for a few minutes, seeing only streetlights and trees, until I came up to the turn. It was a single small street leading off the road. I slowed down, being more careful since this street was smaller and had trees lined up right beside it, so sliding off would make a really terrible night. As I made my way down, I saw a few long driveways leading to faint lights in the trees far out. Before I reached the driveway I was to turn down, it looked like all the others. I slowly drove through the driveway until I made it to the house. It was medium-sized and older, completely covered in snow. Nothing looked too notable about it. Really, the only interesting thing was that it was out here in the middle of some forest. I parked out front and got the bag, then started walking up to the door. The snow was thicker than I would have liked, soaking my shoes and even the lower legs of my pants. When I got up to the porch, I knocked and started to set the bag down, but almost immediately, the door swung open. I looked up, seeing a large man in a winter jacket. His face was pale, like he'd just been outside in the cold.
"Hi, I got your order right here,"
I said, holding the bag up. After a moment, the man stepped back and opened the door wider.
"You can set it down right over there."
He lifted his arm and pointed toward what I assume was the kitchen. The way he said it made me feel like I had to, but I knew it was a horrible idea to go in there. I looked at the man's hands, seeing he wasn't holding anything, so it really didn't make any sense for me to do anything other than hand him the bag.
"Sorry, but I really have to get going,"
I said nervously, holding the bag up again. The man's face dropped into a frown, then he suddenly slammed the door shut. Still holding the bag up, and just a bit shocked by what was happening, I set it down on the porch and quickly started walking back to my car. But just as I got past the front yard, I heard something from behind me. I turned around, realizing it was from somewhere on the other side of the house. It could have been a back door or something, but was too muffled to hear clearly. Getting creeped out, I walked quicker and got in my car. I switched it on, and right as I looked up, I saw the man coming around the side of his house and making his way quickly over to my car. He had something in his hands. It almost looked like rope, but there was something else that I wasn't able to make out. I suddenly felt my heartbeat spike and adrenaline take over my body. I started going in reverse, trying my hardest to go quick while also not getting stuck in the snow. The man got close, probably just a few feet away, before my car was able to grip the road and start picking up some speed. I backed up through the whole driveway, seeing the man eventually stop and watch, slowly fading into the dark as I backed up into the street. I don't know what he was doing. Honestly, the whole thing was just terrifying and confusing, enough to make me not even want to think about it. I still do food deliveries, but I'm far more cautious, and most of the time, I don't even knock on the doors anymore. I just drop the food on the porch and leave. Had I stayed any longer that night, or had entered the house, who knows what would have happened to me. This happened several years ago, in early October. I had 2 weeks off work and had taken a trip down to a cabin in the hills outside of my city. It was an Airbnb that was far out, which was perfect because I wanted to spend a few days camping as well. I drove 2 hours to the cabin and got there in the afternoon. It was really nice and quiet. No other cabins or buildings were in sight. It was just the woods going all around. I set my things inside and looked through the rooms, but it was nothing special. It had a very cozy, old-fashioned feel to it. Not something I was a huge fan of, but it was a nice change of environment for a vacation. The rest of that night and the following few days went by with nothing of interest. I spent my time relaxing, sitting outside in the cold fall weather for most of the days, and spending the nights inside by the fireplace. It was on the 5th day, though, that I set out with my camping gear. I wasn't sure how long exactly I was going to camp for, but planned for 2 to 3 nights. There were a couple trails nearby that I was aware of from planning ahead, but only one of them actually connected to the cabin. To keep things simple, I chose to just take that one so I could leave straight from the cabin and not have to drive anywhere. I walked for at least 3 or 4 hours before I found a spot I was happy with. This was the only clearing I'd found, aside from the trail itself, but something would just feel uncomfortable about camping directly on the path. It was closing in on nighttime already, so I got my tent up and started a fire. As it got darker, I put on my heavy sweater and jacket, with the cold really starting to come in. I sat out by the fire for an hour, heating up a quick meal and waiting for myself to get more sleepy. But at some point while I was sitting there, my eyes caught sight of something. A figure walking out in the woods. I watched as they walked through the dark, no flashlight or anything, and disappeared in the distance. The only light in the woods was my campfire, aside from the dim moonlight, so whoever was out there had to have seen me. It was so strange the way they were walking though, just being out here in the woods with no light and not even following the trail. It made me feel really unnerved, enough to think about taking the long walk back to the cabin, but I knew it wasn't safe to go out this late into the night. I stayed on watch for a half hour, checking everywhere, but not seeing any more signs of the person. After a while, I started getting tired, so I flattened the fire and let it burn out. But just as the glow faded into ashes, I heard footsteps coming from the left of the campsite. My eyes widened, looking into the woods and trying to force my eyes to adjust to the dark, but all I could see was a few feet ahead. The footsteps got louder, coming toward the campsite, getting close enough for me to think that they had to be just outside of my sight. But then they walked slightly off, staying in the dark and passing by, then continuing to walk away. They never stopped or did anything to show that they acknowledged that I was there, but the chances of them being out here at the exact place I was just impossible to be a coincidence. Once the footsteps were gone, I took out my flashlight and disassembled my tent, packing my things and going back to the trail. It wasn't ideal, but I could sense that something was off about whatever was going on. I walked quickly, keeping my flashlight on the trail and trying to keep myself calm. The woods were so quiet though, just adding to the eeriness of the situation I'd found myself in. Although I had my doubts, I made it back to the cabin. It was still well into the night, and after walking so much that day, on no sleep, I passed out on the couch just minutes after getting inside. My mind was so foggy, I wasn't even really thinking about the person in the woods anymore. Being a 4-hour walk from where I'd seen them, I didn't feel I really had reason to be scared anymore. As I was passed out though, I groggily woke up to a strange sound. Something on the other side of the cabin, like wood scraping against the walls. My eyes shot open and I whipped my head around to face the back of the room, seeing the window slowly being pushed open by a man outside. His eyes immediately shifted onto me as I stood up, then he dropped the window and ran away. By the time I'd gotten over, he was well into the cover of the woods. I got everything together and left the cabin, driving to a hotel in a nearby town. Obviously, I don't know who that man was, or what he was doing out there. Clearly, he'd followed me though, and tried to get inside the cabin while I was sleeping. If he had, there's no saying what would have happened. It was a couple days before Halloween. I actually had the next few days off, so after I got off work, I was looking forward to staying up late and enjoying the night. I picked up some fast food on the way home, eating on the couch while watching some Netflix. About 30 minutes into the show, I paused it and got up to throw out the rest of the food that I hadn't finished. I walked into the kitchen and tossed it, but when I turned around, I saw someone standing in my backyard. They were just looking at my house, not really doing anything else. For context, my backyard was small but fenced in, so there was no way he just stumbled through while taking a shortcut or something. I flipped on the back porch light and slid the door open.
Hey, what are you doing?
I yelled at them. With the porch light now on, I could see their face. They were young, probably in their 20s, but had really tired and, for lack of a better word, creepy eyes. They didn't respond to me, so I called out again.
You need to leave. This is my property.
The guy looked over at me, then casually started walking toward the gate. I made sure they left, going to my front window and watched them walk down the street. Once he had left, I just took a moment to think about what was going on. It was such an odd thing. Why was he even standing in my backyard to begin with? He was just staring at my house for seemingly no reason. I even went as far as to go out into my backyard and stand in the same place he was, looking up at my house to see what he could have been looking at, but there really wasn't anything. I went back inside and tried to forget it. I didn't really know what else to do. I poured myself a drink and sat back down, playing the show. I'd finished the episode and just started the next one, so maybe 20 minutes had gone by before I heard a few subtle footsteps running in my backyard, followed by a thud against my house. I stood up and ran to the kitchen, seeing that same guy now against my back door. He was pushing his body against it and aggressively trying to pull it open. I grabbed the handle just in case he somehow got through the lock, but seeing the rage in his eyes close up was horrifying. I backed away and got my phone, calling the police as I stood in the kitchen and watched this guy continue trying to get in. But then, he just stopped. He stared at me through the glass door, breathing heavily and still having that crazed look in his eyes. Then he walked back to the gate, but this time he didn't walk away. He stayed somewhere on the side of the house, like he was hiding. I constantly went back and forth from all the windows, waiting for the police to arrive and hoping the guy didn't try anything else. 5 minutes went by with no sounds or movement before a police car showed up. Right away, I heard footsteps running from the side of the house, but not away from the house. They ran back up to the door, trying to force it open again. They chose to attempt breaking in again, rather than taking their chances running away. Obviously, police were able to get him in the act, and after a quick struggle, they got him cuffed and into the car. When questioned, it was very apparent that the guy was under the influence of something heavy, and it was later confirmed with some tests. Despite questioning him that night, and in the following days when he was sober, the man never gave actual reasons for his actions. I'm unsure how to feel about it. Part of me sees it as just some crazy guy that had no reason, so why worry about it? But then a part of me thinks of the look in his eyes, and the fact that he tried to break in over running away means he had to have had a reason. And either way, if he had gotten in, what he would have tried to do to me is likely just as horrifying, reason or not. As far as I know, he was only imprisoned for a few weeks due to not being sober during his actions, so I'm left to just worry about whether or not he intends on coming back. Two years ago, I lived with my younger brother on the East Coast. For the most part, though, we didn't really go out much. I mean, we'd hang out with friends a lot and get food or whatever, but we never really went out and did anything interesting. I started to look up things to do, and one of the most common suggestions was camping because we were right along the Appalachians. I told my brother, but he didn't seem very interested. A couple days later, I went out and bought a few things, like a small tent and some safety tools, then packed up one of my old backpacks and drove out to a nearby trail. Yes, I was really inexperienced, and going camping alone was not a good idea, but I'd only planned to be out for one night, so I figured even if there was a problem, it wouldn't be so bad. After an hour of driving, I got to the trail. No other cars were parked, and I didn't see any other people. I got out and put on my backpack, then walked to the trailhead. It was thin and not a really well-made path, but was good enough. I don't think it was a popular trail. I just found it by scrolling through a huge list and choosing one that wasn't too long. As I hiked down though, it became more and more clear how little used this trail was. Bushes were overgrown and blocking the way, and even in some portions, the grass had grown in and made it really hard to tell what was the trail and what wasn't. But after an hour, I made it to the end. After seeing the trail, it was about what I'd expected the camping ground to be. It was small and mostly overgrown, but there was something I noticed right away that caught my attention. A pile of logs on the other side of the camping ground. I walked up to it and saw that flakes of charred wood were blowing off in the wind, so it had to have been used recently, maybe even the night before. I looked around again, not seeing any tents or signs of someone being here though. Unsure about it, I went to the other end and put my things down, then got to work on the tent. It wasn't that late yet, so I took my time to make sure the tent was well made. Once I was done, I took a breather, sitting down and chilling for a bit. There was about an hour left of sunlight, and I spent it eating and sitting inside the tent on my sleeping bag. After a while, I could tell the sun was setting, but soon after, a sound came from somewhere nearby. A crackling sound, like from a campfire. I unzipped the opening and stepped out, being immediately faced by a man sitting across the campsite, right next to where the half-burnt logs were. He was older than me, probably in his 40s, but there wasn't much else I could see from the little amount of sunlight coming in through the trees. He was already looking at me, so I nervously waved my hand at him. The man waited a few seconds, then lifted his hand as well. I went around to the back of my tent and got a pile of sticks, then made a small campfire. It only took a few minutes before it was mostly dark out. There was only the light from my campfire and the man's campfire on the other side. I kept looking over, trying to see if he had a tent or a backpack or something, but all I could see was him. Every time I looked, I only got more weirded out and uneasy. Where did he even come from? My tent was set up right next to the trail, so I would have heard him walk up unless he came from the other side, which was just empty woods. I sat out there for at least an hour, probably 2, and never saw the man move from his spot. He just sat by the fire, looking forward. Eventually, I went inside my tent, figuring I had to be overthinking all of this, and the man was probably just another camper. He was at a public camping ground after all. I laid down and tried to rest, but I don't think my mind would let me sleep for some reason, so I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint crackling of the man's campfire. I was in there for probably another hour before I heard leaves slowly crunching, making their way toward my tent. I sat up and listened more carefully until I could see the shadow of the man standing on the other side of the fabric. My whole body froze, watching him just stand there for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then his shadow started moving away as I heard the leaves crunch into the distance. I quickly unzipped the tent and looked out. The campground was empty. The man was gone, having left only the burning logs. I started to pack up, shoving the tent into its holder and even breaking some of the rods just to move faster. I left without ever seeing the man come back. As for what happened out there, or what was going to happen, I really don't know. Not more than a week or 2 ago, I hiked out on a long trail in the dense woods behind my town. I lived in a really close-knit town with just under 1,000 people, so we were pretty far out from any big populated cities. The woods on the outskirts were very flat, no mountains or hills, but had a few ponds and some small rivers running through the middle. I was heading to one of these rivers. I'd been there before a few times, though I'd never had the chance to camp there until this day. As I could recall from the previous times, I knew it was about a 3-hour walk, almost perfectly north. As I walked between the trees, it was very quiet, aside from birds and other animals rustling the leaves around me. There were no people or hikers, and I didn't plan to see anyone because this was not even a trail, it was just open woods. But as I was just 45 minutes out from the river, I ran into someone. We were both walking toward each other, and it seemed like neither of us had noticed the other until we were just a few feet away, separated by only a couple trees. I know I had a confused and almost nervous look, finding it really unusual to run into someone off trail in the middle of these woods, but the man had the same look. I was about to break the silence and say hello, but after a second, his face shifted into a slight nervous smile and he turned to walk off to the side. I followed his lead and kept on walking as well, but I looked back once I got a little further away and saw the man was no longer walking, but almost running away. Not saying a word when running into each other gave me a somewhat unsettled feeling, but seeing him run off like that only made it even stranger. It was like the man did not want to be seen, or he didn't care about the almost impossible chance that we had run into each other. Whatever the case, I kept minding my own business and made my way to the river. This was no campsite or anything, so I just plopped my bag and tent down on the flattest area I could find. Then I got a fire going, since the sun was just about to set. I tossed in a bunch of random sticks and twigs that were around and made sure it would burn for a couple hours at least. I was hoping to stay up and wait until the stars came out so I could do some stargazing. Away from town, I can often get a good view of the Milky Way, which is a sight I never want to miss out on. Hours passed while I was sitting and waiting until a distinct sound came through the quiet woods behind me. Footsteps, slow and careful ones. I turned and looked, not seeing much in the dark. As I gazed around though, the footsteps stopped, telling me that while I may not see them, they can see me. I reached down for my bag and picked up a heavy-duty flashlight, shining it at the trees. I could see decently far now, but as I moved it back and forth, I didn't see anyone. I felt my heart rate increasing a bit as the unsettling feeling came over me again.
Anyone out there?
I tried again.
Hello?
Not even the sound of another footstep. After a moment of contemplation, I started to walk toward where I'd heard the sound from. I thought maybe there was a chance I was mistaken, but I needed to be sure. I carefully stepped through the woods, keeping the flashlight steadily pointing ahead until I got to where I thought the sound was from. I moved the light to my left, looking behind each tree, until the light suddenly revealed a large man. It was the one I'd run into only a few hours ago. He was no more than 20 feet away, but even with the light on him, he stood still. In an act of quick thinking, I tried to not react and continued to move my flashlight across the woods, hoping he would think that I somehow didn't see him. Then I began walking back to the tent, trying to act as unbothered as possible. I picked up my bag and looked around once more, before quickly leaving my tent and campfire behind and walking into the woods along the riverside. Once I felt I'd made enough distance, I sprinted as far as I could until I was without a doubt away from that man. I found a spot to rest at and sat there awake until sunrise. I don't think I was followed, as I was able to make it out without ever hearing or seeing that man again. I'm not sure why he was out there, or why he had shown up and hid by my campsite, but I never went back to retrieve my tent, in fear that I might find out. I was delivering a truckload to a company on the far west coast, coming from the east coast. The route across the country is one I've taken many times before, being a truck driver for almost 20 years. It's always the same every time I make one of these drives. Same roads, same truck stops, and same everything. Over these 20 years though, I've never really had anything crazy happen. I've had a few odd scenarios, but they'd never amounted to anything. So when I was driving this route again, I had no worries in my mind. It was just another day on the job. About 20 hours into the route, a storm started coming over and slowing down my driving. It was late too, so by then I was already looking for the next truck stop to sleep at. As I drove though, a very sudden light appeared behind me. The road I was on was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror, but it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Maybe they had just turned on their lights or something. I didn't know, but they very quickly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so close that they were completely covered by the trailer. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back. But then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me, but I had no way to know. For someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm was insane though, and to be tailing behind me so close was just as insane. Thankfully, a sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead, so at least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on just some weird behavior, but as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of it being an attempted robbery, especially when alone on the road at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see anything anyway, but I started feeling less worried as I was coming in on the truck stop. I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors to see if they followed, but with the rain and lack of lighting, it was really too hard to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty though, aside from a few trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot. After waiting a minute and getting some of my stuff organized, I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was drenched from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a bit of relief, grabbing my pillow and blanket from the passenger side. I locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some shut-eye. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to fall asleep, blocking out any possible sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up though, I felt I had only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around, seeing it was still dark out and the storm was the same, if not worse. But before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I reached for the door handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer. Through the rain, I could barely see the outline of a car with its headlights off, and 2 men moving around in front of it. Terrified, I hesitated to step out and confront them, and as I sat there in that moment of hesitation, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me back further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door again. His right hand was shoved in his hoodie, and with 2 other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I just sat in place with the guy outside my door watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock, watching their car disappear onto the road. I called the police and put in a report, but no information ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that if I had been any less aware, and had just tried to drive off at first sight of the men, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it out as safely as I did. It was a typical Friday after my college classes were out, and I was spending the night doing DoorDash. This was my regular routine, dashing on the weekends to help me pay for all my living expenses while on campus. The night started well, getting a lot of orders done and making a good amount, and then it hit a stalemate after the big dinner rush. Very few orders were showing up, and the ones that did, they were very low paying, basically waste of time orders. But then after an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order came through that wasn't too bad. It was 8 miles away, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing absurd, but enough to make it not a ripoff like a lot of the other ones were. I accepted the order and ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped in my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, because any further than 15 to 20 minutes out, it becomes pretty much just bare fields of grass. As I got to that 20-minute mark, it became just that. Very few houses, mostly sitting far out in fields of crops, and nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this empty road going along these farms. Then I made it to the house. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car on the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet, and the house was dark, having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside. I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark, with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by, then I knocked again, but there was no response, not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation, seeing no lights on in the windows and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address, and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together though, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible the situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an empty house and a stranger. In a split-second instinctual reaction, I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me. Frantically, I continued running, and the further out I got, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was covering all views of direction. By then, I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, the man was gone by then. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house. But that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. This happened when I was 18, making the road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff shoved into the trunk and back seat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road trip alone, but was also going to be my first time being away from my family for an extended amount of time, so my nerves were reasonably high. Anyway, the directions I was taking said it was 600 miles total, which I split into 2 days of driving. I was taking whatever route the maps had me take, and it estimated I'd make it to the hotel at 11 p.m., but with possible traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I knew I'd likely get there much later. By 7, the sun was fully gone, and most of the cars were gone too. Every once in a while a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights slowly fade out in front of me, but for most of the drive, it was just me. This actually made me really tired and bored. Around 10, I decided I'd stop at the next gas station before making the final stretch of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I exited the road and entered a gas station. Being so far out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was literally just a gas station with a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any other cars on the road or in the lot, and not even any lights from any nearby houses or buildings in the distance. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to start topping off my tank, and as I looked around, I almost got jump scared by a guy walking up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much older, probably 50s if I had to guess, and he honestly looked homeless. But regardless, being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable.
Hi, do you need something?
I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding.
Take the exit back onto the highway.
I looked at him confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated himself.
Take the exit back onto the highway.
After a second, I said okay, and the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from that he wanted me to take again was a one-way road, so by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man, who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it though, the more crazy that man seemed, just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something, so I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds. Metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows, and once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe, but for some reason, I never got a call back. No update on it at all, almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess. Or at least that was what I assume he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. This was only a few months ago. I was spending the weekend cozying up inside, as it was the end of winter, and these were the last few days of cold before it was supposed to start heating up. This night, it was rainy and cold, so I had nothing better to do than watch some movies and relax. But it was sometime not too long after dinner that there was a knock at the door. I got up and walked over, but looking out the peephole, I didn't recognize the man. He was wearing some brown jacket and a beanie, and he was holding a snow shovel. Seeing as there wasn't any snow on the ground, I didn't understand what he was here for. I cracked the door just an inch and asked what he wanted. It took all but 5 seconds of listening to him to know he was up to no good. He stumbled over his words and was trying to tell me a whole story about how he was just a friendly guy looking for any jobs to do in my yard. Something felt off about it and unnatural, so I said no thanks and started shutting the door, but the guy quickly put his hand on it. For a second, he just stared at me, keeping the door open, before he let go. I shut and locked it, and after processing what happened, I looked back out the window. He walked down to the sidewalk and disappeared in the rainy fog. I watched for another minute to make sure he'd actually left for good, then I went back to my movie. The guy was definitely sketchy, but I didn't think he would come back or anything, and would probably just go on to the next house. The rain had picked up over the next hour. I was still in the living room and had started another movie, although I knew I was probably too tired to finish it. My eyes were drifting in and out, but randomly, there was a thump above me that shook me awake. It was just one thump, and was kind of hard to tell how loud it actually was with the rain outside. But what was odd about it was that it was definitely from above me. I got up and walked upstairs, looking for anything fallen over, or even a leak in the ceiling that might have made the house settle a bit. However, I found nothing. It could have been one of the gutters clicking out of place from the heavy rain, or really anything else, so I ignored it. I went back downstairs, and being more awake now, I decided to finish the rest of the movie. By the time I'd finished it and was ready to go to bed, it was nearly 12 a.m. I shut off the TV and went around turning off all the lights downstairs. But as I was walking upstairs to go to bed, I could very quickly feel the temperature drop as I got closer to the top of the steps. Maybe I was too tired to give it much thought, but when I got upstairs and started closing each of the doors that I'd opened earlier, I noticed something from the corner of one of the rooms. The window was cracked open. I must have stared at it for a whole 10 seconds, thinking how impossible that was, and just being extremely confused. I walked over and looked at it closer. It was one of the windows that had a small roof overhang under it, and before I closed it, I barely could see an imprint on the windowsill of what looked like a shoe. I could feel the blood rush from my face as I turned around and just listened for a moment. The low creaking of the house, combined with the rain speckling the roof, only made me more unnerved, knowing someone was in my house right now. I began slowly walking, as quietly as I could, back into the hallway. All the other doors were still open, making me feel like someone's eyes could be watching me right now through one of the doorways. I was able to make it downstairs though, and from there I got my phone and hid in the garage, calling 911. It took 5 minutes for the first officer to arrive. I heard nothing but the rain during that time. Once I let the officer in, I waited on my porch as he searched the home. About 2 minutes later, I heard him call out upstairs, and then he came down, holding a guy in handcuffs. I quickly recognized him as the man who showed up on my doorstep earlier in the night, and he had a terrible look of anger as he passed by me and was thrown in the car. Putting all the pieces together, the guy had climbed up onto my roof, which was likely the cause of the thump I heard hours ago. Then he got in through the second-story window, which I never had thought to even lock. Most disturbing, though, is that the officer said he was hiding in the master bedroom, which I was literally 30 seconds from entering, and maybe even falling asleep, without any idea he was in there. The guy even took his shoes off after climbing in the window to not let his shoe prints show on the carpet. So the fact that I saw the tiny imprint on the windowsill is a miracle. With him going directly to my bedroom, his intentions were clearly malicious, and thankfully the judge agreed. It's only been a few months since, but I still have sleepless nights where I can't help but feel like someone is hiding inside my home in the middle of the night. A couple years ago, I applied for a temporary job at a local gas station. I was planning to move in 6 months, so I couldn't get anything too permanent, but I still needed to make some cash beforehand. This job paid well, enough to convince me to work the job opening they had for the overnight shift. I would just stay by the register and occasionally do regular maintenance work. This was during my 4th month working there. At some point during this time, I became familiar with a customer that came in pretty frequently. Almost every night, around 1 or 2 a.m., this guy would walk in and buy random different things. Sometimes it was household items, or food, or tools. I always thought it was weird because he'd come in every night to buy a couple things that would be way cheaper and easier to get at any regular grocery store. He didn't talk much either. All I knew was that his name was Dave, and he drove an old red Chevy sedan. He looked like he was maybe 40 to 45 years old. Anyway, one night at the usual 1 a.m. time, Dave pulled into the gas station. No other customers were here. It was just me sitting in the corner waiting out the time. When Dave walked in, though, there was something different about him. He was dripping in sweat, and he was rushing through the aisles, searching for something specific. When he finally found what he was looking for, he hurried up to the counter and tossed it down for me to ring up. It was a master lock, like one for locking up a bicycle. I really didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to question him, but with the guy sweating and being in a rush, I just felt a little off about this. "It's good to see you again, Dave. You just get a new bike?" I asked in a friendly manner, hoping it would come off as just casual conversation. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he fumbled around for his wallet and started yanking out cash in a hurry. I left it at that and just rang him up, then watched him rush into his car and pull away. Something was definitely weird, but hey, maybe he just got a new bicycle and had been riding it around for a couple hours and needed to get back to wherever he parked it so he could lock it up before it was stolen. Maybe that's a stretch, but it was the best I could come up with. The rest of the night passed by, and so did several more days. I didn't see him for almost a whole week, which was odd considering he usually came in every night. It wasn't until my Wednesday shift that I saw him again. It was drizzling outside, so the first several hours went by really slow. I was leaning back in my chair and looking out the window at the rain coming down when his red car pulled into the parking lot. As soon as he parked, he got out and rushed inside. I greeted him as he entered, but he ignored me. He hurried through the aisles and was talking under his breath. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he sounded frustrated, and I got really uncomfortable, like my gut was telling me something was wrong. Then I heard a thud. My eyes shifted to the window, looking at the direction it came from, and the only thing there was Dave's car. It was a loud thud, too, like someone kicking the inside of the door. After a second, I looked back at Dave. He wasn't rushing anymore. He was standing in the aisle, staring directly at me, as if I'd just discovered something that I shouldn't have. There was another thud, but my eyes were fixed on Dave as I could feel panic rushing through my body. Then he quickly looked away and hurried out the door. I was still stunned, but managed to get my phone out and snap a picture of his license plate as he drove away. I called the police immediately. That night felt extremely long as I waited for any updates from them, and it wasn't until I got home around 6 a.m. that I received a call from the police. They found the guy from the license plate I gave them, and they found a woman that he had kidnapped. Apparently, he had just moved into a new small cabin on the edge of town less than a week ago, and he had no registered prior address, so they had no way to know what he'd been up to before this incident. Luckily, they saved this woman before she was harmed, though. Also, it turned out Dave wasn't his real name, which isn't surprising, but at least he's locked up for good now. I was 14 when this happened, and this was over spring break. My parents' anniversary happened to be during this week, so they went on a date night a few hours north and were staying in a hotel. Having the house to myself for once, I invited one of my friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the table in the basement and fired up the PlayStation. We had the speakers up pretty loud and were gaming down there for 3 hours straight. Eventually though, Justin went upstairs to get a glass of water, and when he came back down, he looked worried. I asked what was up, and he said there was someone outside the house. By the kitchen, we had a large sliding glass door, and I guess he saw a person standing in our backyard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, but he was serious. We both went back upstairs and into the kitchen, and at first look, it didn't look like anyone was in the backyard. But then we noticed that there were some smudges on the outside of the door that looked like someone might have been leaning on the glass and looking inside. That's obviously really creepy, so I shut the blinds and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows. We didn't see anything else, so we figured we were all good. Again, we were both just kids and didn't really know how to handle something like this. After a couple minutes, we went back downstairs and continued where we left off. Another couple hours went by, and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 a.m. Justin was getting tired, so we wrapped up our last match and turned off the PlayStation. The basement had 2 small couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets, then turned off the lights and called it a night. For some reason, I had trouble falling asleep. Like I would fall asleep for a few minutes and then wake right back up, over and over. I don't know why, possibly from too much caffeine, but it went on for a really long time. It felt like over an hour. But then, one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, but there was a tiny streak of light across the other end of the room. I sat up a bit and could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase. I looked over at the other couch, and Justin was still there, sound asleep. Did he get up at some point to get more water? There's no way I wouldn't have noticed. I got up, feeling too uneasy to sleep without making sure this was nothing. I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was cracked open, but not enough to see through. I went to the top and opened it further. The hallway light was on, and so was the kitchen light. It was about then that I remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house, and I walked over to the kitchen to look out the back door. The backyard was empty, and nobody was out there from what I could see. As I was about to look away though, something moved across the reflection on the glass door. I spun around, looking behind me and staring down the hall. Whatever I just saw had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway. I didn't know what to do. I just stood for a second before sprinting back into the basement. I woke up Justin, and after a quick explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. We hid in one of the closets down there and called the police, and while we were waiting, we could hear someone moving around upstairs. It was like they were running around the house, looking for something. It got quiet after a few minutes though, and when police showed up, the person was gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door was snapped off, so that's how they got in. Other than that, we don't know anything. For several years after this incident though, every few months we would find those same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It wasn't until we finally got a security camera that they left us alone. At least as far as we can tell. It's been over a year since we've seen any signs of them. What they wanted is still unknown. My name is Caleb Fletcher. I'm 16 years old, and this took place around 8 to 9 months ago, on the 24th of August, which was a Saturday. School had been going on for about 2 weeks, so to de-stress a little, I decided to see if my friends, who I'll call Griffin and Broly, wanted to hop on Fortnite. My mom and sister were out shopping, my dad was working, and I was bored. It was around 8 p.m. when we finally got on to play, because I had decided to make pizza rolls beforehand and ended up burning the batch. After a few rounds, I could tell my friends were getting tired of losing, so they got off after only an hour. I planned on just lying down with my phone and going to bed. That was until I heard my 2 dogs barking outside. It's not unusual for them to bark, given how people typically walk on the side of the road, but I still looked anyway, just to make sure. I didn't see anybody, but seconds after looking out the window, I heard our garage door open and shut. That usually means my dad is home from work, but I didn't see his van outside, and he had texted me earlier telling me that he would be working late tonight. I decided to walk downstairs into the dining room and look out the window to get a better view. From there, I could see that our driveway was empty. There wasn't a person or vehicle in sight. I wasn't the type to go investigate, so I ran back up to my bedroom and texted my family group chat to ask if anybody was home. I told my mom about the garage door, and she told me to turn off the lights, lock my bedroom, and stay there until she got home. So I did just that. About 15 minutes later, I thought I heard our wooden floor downstairs creaking, like someone was trying to be sneaky. I didn't have anything to use as a weapon, so I unclipped my microphone's boom arm from my desk and quietly opened the door. I walked out onto our upstairs balcony and looked over, trying to see if I could spot anyone hiding or anything suspicious. I stupidly yelled, "Is anybody there?" like they were really going to answer. I thought everything was fine though, until I saw a large silhouette of someone standing underneath the balcony. I panicked and ran to the closest room with a door, which happened to be my small bathroom. The intruder must have known I noticed them, because I heard loud and fast footsteps running up our stairs as I locked myself in the bathroom. I had stupidly left my phone in the bedroom, which was the room right next to me. After I built up enough courage, I bolted into my bedroom, locking the door as soon as I got in. My sister's room was right across from mine, and its door was open, so I figured the intruder must have been in there. After locking my bedroom door, I grabbed my phone and typed 911 into it. Just before I called, I noticed that the storage room in my wall was open just a tad. I saw a dark brown eye peeking through the crevice, staring into my soul. The pure terror I felt in that moment is something I'll never forget. I booked it down the stairs and out my front door, running up the hill to my neighbor's house. He was a police officer. He alerted the other cops while I stayed with his wife, and he went down to investigate. I told him exactly where the intruder was, hiding in my bedroom. Minutes later, I ran back down the hill to see if the intruder had been caught. When I walked in, I saw a tall, skinny man with a gray beard and a dirty black coat being pushed onto the floor by my neighbor as he was getting handcuffed. I'm not allowed to be home alone anymore, and we have better security around our house now. My family was just happy to know I wasn't hurt, and they were thankful for my neighbor's bravery. I don't wish an experience like this on anybody, not even my worst enemy. I'm a manager at a mid-sized grocery store. I do 10-hour shifts and work mostly overnights. At the time, our store was having some staff issues that made pretty much every department understaffed and overworked, and overnight stocking was no exception. I had one guy that would help me 5 nights a week, but that was it other than me. This was on his day off, so it was only me working. I got in at 10 and was alone by 10:15. After running some numbers in the office, I started pulling out loads of boxes to the aisles to start unpacking and stocking. Even though I had no help this night, I still had to get everything done, so I was working hard and as quickly as I could. I didn't even stop for a break or anything, but suddenly a tapping sound echoed through the store. I stopped and listened, hearing it happen again, and it sounded just like someone tapping on a window at the front of the store. I looked at my watch for the first time since I started working, and it was 2 a.m. Time had flown by, but there was no reason anyone should be here. I walked down the aisle and to the front, where I quickly saw someone outside the store. He was leaning against the window and trying to look inside. He spotted me as I walked up and stared at me. When I was just on the other side, I asked what he wanted. The man, looking like he was homeless, told me to open the door. He had a straight face, no smile or anything. I said we were closed and he couldn't be here, then turned to walk away, but the man immediately banged on the window. Not tapping like he was before. This was now harsh banging. I looked back at him, and he was clearly enraged, with his fist against the glass. Thinking this guy was crazy, I told him I'd call the cops if he doesn't leave, then started pulling my phone out to show I was serious, and only then did he step away from the window. He still had that angry look as he walked away and into the parking lot. Seeing him leave, I put my phone away and got back to work. We get a lot of crazy customers around here, so I didn't think on it too much. And again, I had to focus on getting my work done. I was only able to get a small cart of boxes stocked, so it was maybe 15 minutes later when a sudden sound echoed through the store. It sounded like something metal snapping or scraping. I quickly dropped what I was doing and ran up to the front. Nobody was at the windows, so I went up to the entrance door. It was one of those revolving glass doors, which uses a bolt lock on the top to keep it from opening when we close the store for the night. Right away, I saw that bolt was missing. Like, not even just unlocked. The entire bolt was gone. I pressed my hand on the door, and it glided around, completely allowing anyone to get in. I could feel my face turn white as I realized what this meant, and I knew I needed to call the police immediately. I turned around to go to the front office, but was instantly looking into the face of that guy from before. He was only a few feet from me, still having that enraged stare. I didn't hesitate to run out the revolving door, hearing the guy follow close behind me. As I ran out into the parking lot, an old van came speeding up to the front. It nearly hit me, but I just kept running until I got to my car. When I rushed in, I noticed the guy wasn't chasing me anymore, and the van was now speeding out of the parking lot. I called the cops and spent the next couple hours explaining what happened. It wasn't until the next day that we got security footage of the man breaking inside, but it wasn't the best image quality. We can say almost for sure that they were trying to get me into their van, but we have no way to know why. I'm sure if I'd not been as quick though, I probably wouldn't have ever been seen again. This was a few months ago while driving for DoorDash. I only drive as a side gig, maybe 10 to 15 hours a week. This night I was only doing a couple orders since it was already late, and I had picked up a small order around 1 a.m. It was to be delivered to a business building somewhere across town, which was apparent by the address. This was a normal thing, usually for overnight workers or whatever. When I pulled into the parking lot though, it was empty. No cars at all, and it didn't look like there was a parking lot behind the building either. I parked in a spot near the front and got out with the food. The place was definitely an office building of some kind and was smaller than most, being only 2 stories and not very wide. All the lights were off in the windows though, aside from one light behind the front door. I walked up to the door and checked the app, seeing it has specific drop-off instructions to enter the main hallway and leave the bag outside of room 232. I looked through the door in the building, seeing this hallway with a bunch of closed doors on either side. Delivering to specific rooms I'd only done at hotels, so this was kind of new for me. I tested the door, pushing on it, and it was unlocked, so I stepped inside. I expected to hear people working, moving around, or talking, but instead didn't hear anything. There wasn't a single sound in the whole building. It was just white noise from the overhead lights buzzing above me. As I passed the first few doors though, they were all numbers in the 100s, like 102 and 106. The room the instructions said to leave it at was in the 200s, so I assumed that meant it was on the 2nd floor. In the middle of the hallway was the doorway leading to the staircase. It was held open with a wedge door stopper on the floor, but the lights weren't on. I stepped in and up to the bottom of the staircase, then looked up. The whole stairwell was pitch black. Not even any light was coming from above, where the room was supposed to be for me to drop it off at. Again, I started to notice the eerie silence, and it sent a chill through me. I was always one to do whatever the instructions say, so I'd get good reviews, but this was the first time I told myself that this was too sketchy. I stepped out of the stairwell and back into the hallway, and just as I did, the door right across from me opened. The lights in that room were off, but a man emerged from behind the door and stepped into the hallway. He was wearing street clothes and just didn't look like an office worker at all. But he stood in front of me and pointed past me at the stairwell. 232 is up there. I nodded, but didn't move, and neither did he. He just looked me in the eyes with a look like he was suppressing his anger. After an intense few seconds, I dropped the bag on the ground and started quickly walking to the exit. The man didn't follow me, but I heard his footsteps go into the stairwell and up the stairs as I left the building. I got in my car and left. I didn't know what that was, or if I was maybe overreacting about it, so I didn't call the police. The following day, though, the police actually called me. Apparently the office reported a break-in, and in the CCTV footage, they saw my car and license plate, tracking it back to me. They also had footage of the break-in, and so they called me in to question me about any information I might have. I didn't have much to give, but it turned out there were actually 3 people that broke inside. One was downstairs, who I saw, but the other 2 were shown on the cameras to be hiding at the top of the stairs, seemingly waiting for me to go up. Disturbingly, several other delivery orders were made to that same office that night. All of the other drivers were smarter than I was, though, leaving the orders outside by the front door. What would have taken place in that office had any of us gone up to the 2nd floor is unknown, but hopefully police can find the 3 men before anyone falls victim to it. I go camping with my dad every summer. He's done it his whole life, and recently I've gotten into it as well. I'm 16, and last year my dad and I went out on our seasonal camping trip. We found the spot online together while looking for a new camping area to try out for the summer. There's no pictures of the area, but the map was easy to follow, and the description of the trail was that it was easy and uncrowded. We set out on Friday morning, parking on the side of the road and beginning down the trail. After the first quarter mile, it was clear that the description wasn't very accurate. It was pretty steep in some parts, and a lot of the trail was muddy or overgrown, which made it actually really hard. Already being there, though, we just pushed through and eventually got to the campsite. It looked no different than the woods on the trail that we had been walking on for the past 2 hours. There were trees everywhere, and just a plot of overgrown grass to set our stuff up on. No cool views or anything. We pitched our tents and made lunch. My dad was a bit of a talker, so the rest of the day we were just in conversation. Once the sun was starting to set, we walked around the trees near the campsite and collected some dry sticks to make a fire with. In the middle of us talking, though, we were interrupted by a loud voice behind us. We both stopped talking and spun around. The woods were suddenly quiet again, and we didn't see anyone there. It sounded not too far away, though, like maybe a mile out. Neither of us said anything for 30 seconds, just staring at the trees and trying to spot any movement. Then it came again. Someone, a man's voice, yelling. It sent chills through me. There was a pain and harshness to the scream, like they were in trouble. I looked up at my dad, who looked really conflicted and worried. He turned me around and led me back to the campsite, quickly starting the fire. The screams kept coming though, and eventually I asked my dad if we should help them. I could tell my dad was thinking of every option. He faced me and told me to stay by the fire and wait. His face was serious, and he said he was going to run a little ways toward the voice and just see what he could see, and that if I saw anyone, to not let them near me. I agreed and watched him run toward the man's voice. After a minute, he was out of sight. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I would have done if I were in my dad's shoes. Leaving someone in need of serious help would make me feel horrible, but we were also in the middle of the woods, so if something happens, well, I don't know. After 10 minutes, I started to get a little worried. The sun felt like it was dropping fast, and there was still no sign of my dad. But then, suddenly, the screaming stopped. The whole forest was now quiet again. I wondered if my dad had found him and was helping him, or if something else happened. Still, after another 10 minutes, my dad was nowhere in sight. With the blanket of darkness starting to cover the forest, I grew more and more nervous. I stood up and walked a little bit away from the campsite and toward where my dad had gone. There were still no signs of him, so I walked a little more, and then, finally, I heard footsteps from up ahead. I still couldn't see anything, but as the sound of his steps started getting closer and closer, an eerie, almost disturbing feeling came over me. Then, just before I thought they would come into my sight, a voice to my left called my name. It was my dad, running toward me and yelling at me to go back. There was urgency and worry in his voice, so I hurried to the campsite, and my dad followed behind me. He quickly packed the essentials into his backpack. The look on my dad's face is something I still remember vividly. It was complete fear and distraught. We left the tents and ran for the first mile, then fast-walked back to our car. On the drive home, I asked him what he saw out there, who the man was, and why he was screaming. My dad said nothing. Even to this day, he never brings it up or says anything of what he saw. Every time I so much as mention that day, his entire demeanor changes and his face falls flat. So I just stopped asking. All I can think about now is those footsteps that I heard walking toward me, and what would have happened if my dad hadn't shown up in time. I was out camping in a familiar part of the forest near my city. My city is small and honestly has not much to do, so camping is the one thing I found that I really enjoy doing. I'm not a big fan on hiking though. I prefer the more relaxing aspects of camping, like sitting by a fire and having no responsibilities. The trail I went on was one I'd been to plenty of times. It was only a 30-ish minute walk from the parking area, and the campsite was right by a lake. Having only my small city near the forest, there's only so many people that could possibly be camping at the same time and place as I was. But this time when I got there, a man had a tent already set up. I could see him down by the lake, walking in the sand. He looked like he was in his 40s. He had some generic swimming shorts on and a stained white t-shirt. I walked a little further from where his tent was, then set up mine. I then collected some large stones from nearby and placed them in a ring, prepping for the campfire I was going to have later. As I did, I noticed the man looking at me. Not just like a glance though. He was standing down by the lake with his body turned completely toward me and was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but every time I looked back, he was in that same spot and still staring at me. It got really creepy, so I ended up waving at him to see if he was maybe wanting to say hi or something. But after I waved, he turned around and continued walking along the lake. Whatever that was, I didn't like it. It gave me an uncomfortable feeling about that guy, so I tried to keep an eye on him. For a while, nothing else really happened, but after 20 minutes, he walked away from the lake and into the forest behind his tent. I thought there might have been a trail back there, or he could have just been walking around, but whatever the case, I was just glad he was gone for now. I put my chair down by the lake and relaxed. I was down there for an hour or so before picking my chair back up and moving it back to my tent. The sun was setting, so I lit up my campfire. As I sat there and looked around at the forest, I suddenly spotted something. Far out, there was a shape next to one of the trees. I squinted, trying to get a clearer view. All I could make out was what looked like a white shirt. It was that guy again, and he was just standing far behind my campsite and staring in my direction. Now this was getting really creepy. How long was he watching me for? I moved my chair to the other side of the campfire so that I was now facing him, just so I didn't lose sight of him. He stayed there for a good 30 or 40 minutes, watching me from far out in the forest, before it started to get dark out. The shadows everywhere started making it hard to see him anymore, and after a while, I couldn't even make out his shape. I could only look in the general direction he was in. Yet with my campfire lighting up my sight, I knew he could still see me. Knowing he was still out there staring at me, yet not being able to see anything, I started getting really anxious. I mean, what the hell was this guy doing? He had a tent here, like he was camping, but in the hours that I'd been here, I never once saw him go to it. With everything getting to my head, I debated packing up and leaving, but at this point, I was worried the guy would follow me out. So, I sat there and tended the fire, making sure it didn't go out, and I just waited. Several long, tiring hours passed, and I didn't see anything. He never came back to his tent, or came close enough for me to see him. When the sun started coming up, I looked all around and saw no signs of him. I packed up my gear and booked it back to my car. It's hard to know that guy's intentions. If I hadn't stayed awake and been cautious of him from the start, who knows where I'd be right now. I was taking a few days off and spending it camping in the woods. I was in some forest a few hours from my town and had set up camp at the end of a 4-hour trail. I'd spent the night there already and had noticed this thin path leading out from the campsite. I had no idea where it went, and it wasn't on the map of the area, but having nothing better to do on that second day, I thought I'd go for a short hike down the path just to see if it led anywhere cool. Maybe a small pond or waterfall or something. I brought with me a backpack with food and water in case I'd be out longer than expected. Walking through the trail, it was very obvious that almost nobody used it, or at least hadn't used it in a long time, maybe even years. It was very thin and overgrown in a lot of sections, and I didn't see any signs of people, like shoe prints or anything. This went on for several miles, taking around 2 hours before I found the end, and it wasn't what I expected. There was a house, or cabin, sitting in the woods. At first sight, there was no mistaking that it was abandoned. Moss and vines were growing out of the wood siding, and the doors and windows were all open. Before approaching any further, I looked around at my surroundings, just checking for anything, as this wasn't a normal thing to just stumble across. The woods were calm and unsettlingly still. I went up to the doorway and poked my head in, looking down the front hallway. There was dust and debris lying all over the floors, but it was otherwise barren. I went in a little further. It smelled of mildew and rotting wood, but as I crept through the rooms, there wasn't much to see. Feeling uneasy though, I was about to turn around and leave, but a small glimmer caught the side of my eye. On one of the closed wooden doors, the handle had been ripped off and replaced by a silver padlock. It almost looked brand new and matched nothing else in the house. My curiosity immediately had me thinking of why there was a padlock on the door to an otherwise empty and ruined cabin. The more I looked at it though, that uneasy feeling just took over me, and I couldn't get myself to investigate. I quickly left the house and went back to the path. Just as I entered the trail again, I heard a single footstep on the wooden floor inside the house. I turned and looked at the doorway, but saw nothing, so I kept on walking, trying to distance myself from that place. As I walked back though, for the whole 2 hours, I kept hearing footsteps in the distance, like someone was following me. The trees densely covered the area though, making it impossible to see that far. When I got back to the camp, I got a fire going early and just sat and waited, listening and looking to see if anyone showed up. By nightfall, I hadn't heard anything else, but as the hours got later, I started hearing it again. Footsteps out in the distance, far beyond the light of the campfire, but definitely close enough for them to see the light. It went on for several hours, hearing a line of footsteps every 10 to 15 minutes. Still though, I was never able to see them, and eventually it got so late that I knew I had to sleep. So I left the campfire going as I got inside my tent. I was in and out of sleep for the rest of the night, waking up at every small sound the woods made. After getting almost no sleep, I left. What the cabin was doing there, and whoever had followed me that night, I'll never know. I can't say what they intended to do, but their disturbing stalking behavior only lets me assume the worst. But I can never seem to stop thinking about the disturbing possibilities of what was behind that locked door. There's an abandoned hotel in my town that's been vacant for decades. It had been bought out several times before, but every time they ended up going bankrupt after just a few years. Our town is small and kind of old-fashioned, so there's really no reason for anyone to visit unless they have family here, which means that there's really no reason to even have a hotel as big as this one was. It was at least 6 stories, and was probably the largest building in our town. Anyway, when I was 23, I just casually decided to check it out. I felt like there was nothing actually dangerous or scary about it. It was just an empty abandoned building that would be cool to walk around and look at. I decided to go during the day, because I figured that if anyone was there during the daytime, then they were probably just harmless people exploring it like me. I parked at a store that was a half-mile away, then walked to the hotel. It was mostly isolated on the side of the road, being that most of the stores surrounding it had already been torn down. The hotel itself, though, looked a lot worse than the last time I'd seen it. The brick was crumbling, and the whole place seemed like it was fading and decaying. I went up to the front and glanced inside. It was mostly empty, with only a few things scattered around, like chairs and old furniture. I stepped in and walked through the lobby, opening the door to the staircase. The whole stairwell was covered in shadows as barely any light was getting in. All I could see was a dim beam of light coming from one of the floors above. It was only just enough for me to find my way up the stairs. but when I got to the door on the second story, it was blocked. Something on the other side was keeping it from opening, and a sheet of wood was covering the window on the door. I left it and continued up to the third story, opening the door and entering the hallway. This was probably the most creepy setting I'd ever been in. The hallway was dark and musty, with only a small window on either end to light up the corridor. I walked down a little bit, then went into the first room with an open door. Oddly, it looked kind of normal. There were layers of dust covering everything, but all the furniture was set up as if it had never been moved. There were even towels and soap left in the bathroom still. As I was looking at all of this, I heard a small thump. I turned around and faced the doorway, not sure if that was from the floor I was on or the one below me. A few seconds later, quiet footsteps creaked the floorboards, coming down the hallway. As they got closer, I just stared at the doorway and hoped that they weren't on my floor. After a few seconds, though, I heard them stop, followed by a door opening and then slamming shut on the floor below me. Afterward, there were no footsteps or really any sounds at all. I tried to be quiet, walking up to the hallway and looking out to make sure nobody else was here. Thinking about it, though, I couldn't see why another person just exploring the place would walk so deliberately to a room and slam the door. And the more I thought about it, the more nervous I got. Only adding to the eeriness was how silent the whole place was now. After a minute of standing in the hallway and thinking I'd had enough, I quietly walked back to the staircase and opened the door, entering the dark stairwell and starting to descend. There was no way to be quiet on the metal stairs. Each step was an unavoidable hollow thump. But as I passed the door to the second story, I noticed a small gap in the doorway that definitely wasn't there before. Then I looked down at the stairs ahead of me. A figure stood in the stairwell only a few steps below me, barely visible in the darkness, but their eyes stared right at me. They looked dreadful and emotionless. With no choice, I started carefully walking on the edge of the staircase, passing by them with only a couple feet between us, as his eyes followed every move I made. Once I got to the bottom, I opened the door and ran out into the lobby where I could finally see clearly. I hurried back to my car and sat in the parking lot for a while. Looking back, that was probably the dumbest thing I'd ever done. I guess I just didn't realize what I was walking into. I'm not sure why that person was there, or what they were doing, but leaving when I did was probably the only good decision I made. I was driving back from my friend's place in Wisconsin. I live right outside of Chicago, which is about a 6-hour drive, so I decided to do it all in one go. However, I didn't anticipate leaving so late. I wasn't on the road until 8 p.m., but I absolutely had to be home for work the following day, so there was no option to hang out any longer. If you aren't familiar with Wisconsin, it's mostly flat with a ton of forests all over the northern parts, and small towns scattered throughout. The biggest cities are closer to the border, nowhere near where I was. My buddy's place was in one of these small towns, so pretty much right out of the gate, it was barren forest roads. There were a few cars here and there, but once I was 30 minutes out and the sun had set, there wasn't a single other car. I probably went a whole 2 hours without seeing anyone else on the road. The endless flat forest on either side of me was so repetitive that it was making me sleepy. It definitely didn't help that I was so tired from hanging with my friend all weekend either. I was trying everything to stay awake, but at just around 11 p.m., I actually saw something up the road. I opened my eyes a bit wider and could tell it was a person. They were standing on the shoulder and had their thumb out, clearly looking for a ride. For some reason, the very first thought that came through my mind was that having company in the car would surely help keep me awake. I almost instinctively began slowing down, and as I got closer, they started walking down the shoulder toward my car. I rolled the window down and pulled up next to them. "Hey, I just need a ride into the next town, if you've got a spare seat for me." It was really dark out, and I couldn't see much of him, but he sounded tired. I let him into the back seat. It wasn't until I started pulling away that the thought even popped into my head about why he was out here. I mean, the middle of the woods in the middle of the night was kind of a weird place to be. I looked in the mirror. The guy was looking at me through the shadow that covered the back seat. He looked like he was 30-ish, with stubble and a buzz cut, but I didn't see a backpack or anything with him. "So, what brought you out here?" he asked me. I told him I was at my friend's place for the weekend and was heading back home to Chicago. Then I asked him the same question. His straight face turned into a fake smile. "Oh, I was just walking on a trail in the woods and got lost along the way. Found the road and figured it best to catch a ride." I thought about his answer for a second. I didn't know about any trails or really anything at all in these parts of the woods. But even if there was, he would have had to drive to get here. Why didn't he mention that? Wouldn't he want me to take him to the trailhead instead of into town? I don't know. I was more awake and aware now, and it was making me uneasy the more I thought about it. But then the guy suddenly told me to stop. He told me to pull over and drop him off here. I cautiously did as he said, pulling the car onto the shoulder and parking. We were maybe 5 miles down the road from where I picked him up, and there was still nothing but dense forest all around. The guy quickly opened the door, and without saying anything, he started rushing away, heading for the trees. I was super weirded out and concerned about this whole thing, and at this point I just wanted to get out of there. But he left the door open, and when I leaned into the back seat to shut it, I noticed a drawstring bag tucked under the passenger seat. It wasn't mine, it was definitely his. I called out for the guy, and he turned around. "Hey, you left your bag." He stood with a straight face and wide, frustrated eyes, staring at me for several uncomfortable seconds. Then he came back. "Your bag, you left it right here." I pointed under the seat, and he hesitated for another several seconds before grabbing it abruptly and turning around, hurrying back into the forest. I reached over and shut the door, then left the area as fast as I could. I was relieved to be away from that guy, knowing that something was definitely up with him. But it was only a few minutes down the road that I started to pick up on an awful odor from the back seat. It got increasingly worse over the next 30 minutes, until I got into another small town. I stopped at a gas station and used my phone light to look into the back seat. On the carpet under the passenger seat, right where the drawstring bag had been sitting, there was a deep red stain. I almost threw up as I ran into the gas station and called the police. I gave them all the info I had on what happened, and they cut out the piece of carpet from my car to get tested. They also did a search for the man, but came up empty-handed, only finding a few footprints near the spot I picked him up at. I don't know exactly what was in that bag, but it seems like he was trying to plant it in my car as a means to cover something up. we still have no idea who he was or what he was up to that night. I was working a quick DoorDash shift on a Monday night. I got out of my day job at 7 and decided to make a few deliveries. It was a pretty regular, quiet night with nothing much to note. I delivered about 7 or 8 orders before I took my last one for the night. I drove it down to the house and dropped it off, then started heading back into town where my apartment was. It was around 10 o'clock now, and after that delivery, I was about 20 minutes out in the farmland that surrounds our town. A couple minutes into my drive back, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, and the man moved over a little bit, but not enough to be out of my way. Once I got closer, he looked right at me and stuck his thumb out. In my headlights, I could tell he was an older guy, like early 50s, and he had a large backpack over his shoulders. Since I was already slowing down, I figured I'd be helpful and ask if he needed a ride into the city, since I was heading that way anyways. He leaned on the windowsill and thanked me for stopping. His eyes looked heavy and exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but he seemed nice enough, so I agreed to give him a ride. What I wasn't expecting, though, was for him to immediately open the passenger door and sit in the seat right next to me. It didn't really matter, I guess, but I felt like it was usually common courtesy to get in the back seat. As he got situated, I looked past him at where he came from. It was a field of tall grass, just a huge farm or something. "You from around here? What brings you out to the farmlands?" He looked over at me. "Just making my way across the country to visit my family. Don't have a car, so I've been hitching rides." I thought that was pretty interesting, so I asked more about where he was from, but he gave me very vague and uninterested answers. A couple times I caught him looking into my back seat. Not just quick glances though, like he was running his eyes through the whole back seat and looking for something. Something about this guy started to make me feel off. He wasn't talking much and was just acting really unusual. "Is everything okay?" I asked. I still had my eyes on the road, but he didn't say anything, so then I looked over at him. My eyes were drawn to his disturbing stare before I noticed the knife he had clenched in his right hand. "Stop the car." I didn't say a word and parked right in the middle of the road. I was terrified and just thought if I let him take whatever he wanted, then I'd get out unharmed, so that's exactly what I was going to do. As soon as the car was in park, I turned to open my door, but he quickly stopped me. "Get in the back," he demanded, still clenching the knife. I froze up for a moment, realizing we were in the middle of empty fields, and that if I get in the back, I'll probably never have another chance to escape. He told me again, and that's also when I noticed his large backpack was slightly open by his feet, revealing a thick bundle of rope. I had no choice but to try my luck escaping now, before it was too late. I opened the door and jumped out of the car in one swift motion. The man tried jumping across the front seat to grab me, but I sprinted to the other side of the road and into the tall grass. I kept on running through the field until I felt like he couldn't find me. Then I stood still and waited. He yelled a few times from the road, but then it went quiet. All I could hear was the wind blowing the grass around. I stood still and motionless for a good 15 minutes before I slowly made my way back toward the road. I looked through the grass and could see my headlights still beaming onto the pavement and the driver door still open. The man was nowhere to be seen. After scoping it out for another minute, I sprinted up and grabbed my phone, then ran back into the grass and called 911. I didn't know if he was still hiding somewhere, waiting for me, so I didn't risk staying up there. Eventually, the police showed up, though. I couldn't believe the man didn't drive away in my car. He must have just grabbed his backpack and run off into the other field, or maybe even tried chasing me through the grass and just didn't find me. Either way, it clearly showed that his intentions were not to just rob me of my belongings, which makes the scenario 100 times more disturbing. I gave the police a description of the man, but there still haven't been any sightings. This was in 2016. My parents had just moved to the West Coast, and I was on my way driving there to visit them. A lot of the way there is pretty empty, with only a few gas stations spread out down the long highway. At some point during my second night of driving, my check engine light came on in my car. I wasn't exactly surprised, because my car was old and not very reliable, but I wasn't really a car person either, and I had no clue what could be going on with it. I looked up where the next gas station was. It was another 30 miles away, but I really had no choice but to make it there. However, my car decided to make the choice for me instead though, as the engine suddenly cut out, leaving me coasting along the side of the road until I eventually stopped. I tried everything I could to get it working again. I even got out and looked under the hood for any possible causes of the problem, but I saw nothing. Honestly, I thought this was just the final leg of my car. In the meantime, all I could do was find a way to get help. I pulled my phone out, and I immediately felt my stomach drop as I had no service. I tried a few calls anyway, but obviously none of them went through. After 30 minutes of trying to find a solution, I realized I really only had one option, which was to hitchhike a ride. I'd never done it before, and I was kind of nervous, not really knowing what to expect. I always found it as a strange thing that I never thought I'd ever do. I stood out there on the side of the road and just waited. Every 15 or so minutes, a single car would pass by, but none of them stopped for me. This went on for hours. It was probably 2 or 3 a.m. before I saw the headlights of another car coming down the road. I stuck my thumb out, assuming it would pass by like all the rest, but to my surprise, they started pulling over. It was a black pickup truck, and I couldn't really see the driver until I walked around to the side of their car. He was a very skinny man with a long, thin face, and matched with his long black hair, it was a little unsettling. "Need a lift?" he said happily, with a big grin. Something really put me off about this guy, but honestly I was tired, and this might be my only opportunity to get a ride, so I didn't pass it up. I hopped in the back seat. I felt like it would have been awkward if we didn't have some small talk, so I asked him what he was up to tonight. "Just cruising on the highway," he responded, like it was a hobby of his or something, which was kind of strange since we were in the middle of nowhere. I was surprised he didn't ask me what I was up to, or why I needed a ride, but I tried to think of another question just to keep the conversation going. The man interrupted my train of thought, though, when he looked at me for a few seconds in the mirror. "You don't have any weapons on you, right? Just making sure I'm safe," he said, with again that odd smile of his. I said no, thinking it was a strange question to bluntly ask, but maybe he really was just trying to watch out for himself. I don't know, but after that I stopped talking. 10 more minutes went by as I just stared out the window before the man made a sudden turn off the highway and onto a dirt road. I immediately sat up and looked around, realizing this was definitely not right. "Where are we going?" He shot a quick look at me, then continued to drive without answering. I asked him again, more loudly, as the fear was building up. "Where are you taking me?" At this point, I knew that no matter what, the next time this car stops, I was going to bolt, so I got ready with my hand on the door. As he drove down this beaten dirt road, suddenly a small farmhouse appeared in the dim lights. Its front door was wide open, and the whole place looked like it was decaying and falling in on itself. Once we got up closer, he suddenly slammed on the brakes. I jolted forward into the seat, and the man instantly swung his door open and ran around to the side door. I swung mine open as well and sprinted out, heading right for the tree line. The man ran around the car and came running up behind me, but once we were in the woods, it was so dark that I could only hear his footsteps and could no longer see him, even though he was just 10 or 15 feet behind me. I took a sharp turn, getting behind a tree and holding my breath. His footsteps came right up past me and continued further into the woods. A whole minute passed before I heard his creepy voice call out for me. Over and over, he'd repeat the same lines in the same tone of voice. "Come on, let's go back. I'll give you a ride. I wasn't trying to scare you." It was extremely disturbing. Even worse, I never heard his footsteps go back toward the car, so I had no idea where he was, or if he was lurking in the dark somewhere nearby. I knew I had to leave though, so I started quietly walking in the direction of the main road, or at least what I thought was that direction. I really couldn't see anything, but once I was deeper in the woods, I pulled my phone out and turned the brightness on low. Somehow, I happened to have service now. I almost wanted to cry from the relief. I dialed 911 and had them track the call so they knew where I was. Thankfully, I made it back to the main road and met 2 officers there. By that time, the man and the car were somehow gone. I don't know how he managed to get out of there without being seen. As for the farmhouse, it was just what it looked like. Some old, abandoned place, which makes it even stranger that the man knew exactly where it was and turned into it on purpose. I have no idea what he was going to do. I'm just glad I didn't have to find out. My family owns a huge plot of land full of trees, and on the edge of the property, they built a cabin. Compared to the main house, it feels a lot more closed off in the woods. This year, I took a trip up there around the end of October to see my parents and siblings. With the house being full, I volunteered to stay at the cabin for the few days I was there. This was the first day I arrived on the property. There wasn't a drivable road to get to the cabin, so I parked at the main house. All I had was a light backpack with my stuff, and I was only really planning on sleeping at the cabin, so I didn't bother making a trip there just to drop my bag off. Around 5, we had what I guess was a small party, as it was the first time in a while that all of us were together. We had some food and drinks, and shared updates on our lives. It was a good time, but it definitely wore out my energy after a few hours. I told them I was gonna head out to the cabin for the night and get ready for bed, so I threw my backpack on and left through the back door. The trail to get there was very thin and was about a 10-minute walk. I hadn't even thought about the dark though. There were no lights or anything along the trail, so I had to put on my phone light just to see where I was stepping. A little ways down, I randomly heard a stick snap behind me. I turned and looked at the path, but my phone light was awful and barely lit up anything. I figured it was nothing and kept walking. Only a couple seconds later though, I heard it again. It was like as soon as I started walking, something behind me started walking too, like I was being followed. "Who's out there?" "Alex, I know it's you. Not funny, bro." I called out, hoping it was just my brother being annoying. I knew if it was him, though, he would have been cracking up by now. I felt really uneasy as the suspense of not being able to see anything really started getting to me. I kept walking, moving faster now. I heard leaves crunch several times as I continued making my way to the cabin, though I didn't turn around, knowing I wouldn't see anything anyway. I hoped it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I drank a little too much. Whatever it was, I didn't want to be out in the woods any longer, so I hurried and finally made it to the cabin. I unlocked the door and got in, locking it behind me. After tossing my bag on the floor, I rubbed my face out of stress of whatever I just experienced. And just then, a subtle sound came from the other side of the door. It was someone turning the knob and trying to open it, and right after they figured out it was locked, they banged on it. Not just knocks, like full-on hitting the door. I almost fell over just from the jump scare of it. They kept banging on the door though, and with nothing else to do, I walked up and looked out the thin window on the side of the door to see who it was. When I did, I saw a man wearing a dark jacket and heavy boots that I'd never seen before in my life. I only looked for a moment before his eyes shot over at me. They were full of rage, and he immediately followed up by pounding on the window. Then, out of nowhere, a voice yelled from the woods. The man paused, then sprinted in the opposite direction. About 30 seconds later, I checked out the window and saw my brother Alex running up to the cabin. I guess he happened to see the guy come up behind me as I started walking to the cabin, and after asking my parents if they knew him, he immediately came running for me. To this day, we've never seen him again, and don't know what he was doing out in the woods on our property, or why he was stalking me. That night still scares the hell out of me to think about though.